So this is an update on a talk I gave last year, addressing the question. Last year's conference, for those of you who weren't here, focused on productivity and some of the missing middle concepts that we've been talking about today. So I gave my view on what's missing from HPC, and I'm going to update that talk today with what we've done in the year since I was last here. So some of this will be a little bit of a review for you if you were here last year, for which I apologize. But they're great slides, so you can enjoy them all the more the second time. So if you're in this room today, you probably think HPC is a really good idea. And if you do, you're in great company. Just in the past couple of years, lots of blue ribbon reports. And I was bored one week at the office a few years ago and thought I was reading the same thing again and again, so I went to prove it to myself. And I downloaded all the blue ribbon reports I could find from the United States about HPC since 1980. And no, I was right. They do, in fact, all say just about the same things. So we'll keep repeating the mantra, and maybe somebody will listen eventually. They are useful. So HPC is a good thing. We're not the only country that believes it, obviously. If you look at the evolution in one of the metrics, starting in 1993, the top 500 list is the top there. Deeper colors of red, more HPC capability. So the United States still leads in terms of total share of machines, but you can see that we don't share the leadership and we don't clearly dominate the market anymore. And from a geopolitical perspective, if you're in the United States worried about national security, you're probably especially worried about some of the places that the red shows up on that map today. So HPC is a good idea. We're not the only people that know it anymore. And Wolfgang just gave us a good overview of the things that continue to go on in Europe in terms of their investment. So this is the standard technical computing pyramid. Very few users at the top doing supercomputing. I differentiate HPC and supercomputing. HPC, or supercomputing, being the high-performance subset of high-performance computing. We've got a few users at the top. We've got lots of users at the bottom doing individual computing on your Macs and laptops and Chromebooks and Surface tablets and all that stuff. But then we have, rather than having some users in the middle, we have a few users in the middle. And this is whatever middle applies to you, whether it's my middle is the acquisition engineering enterprise in the Department of Defense, which is tens of billions of dollars a year, or whether it's small and medium-sized manufacturers at millions of dollars a year. So if you think HPC is a good idea, this pyramid bothers you, right? Because there are too many fews. So where are those users? Well, if you look at where we got the users that we have today in supercomputing is the business that my program is in, but high performance and technical computing in general, they come from fairly esoteric fields. Things like astrophysics, where you might be worried about the behavior of two galaxies colliding, something which is very difficult to study objectively in a laboratory environment. Or where you're worried about building things that stand up in the face of adverse external events, or whether you're worried about building things that knock down buildings, right? This is expensive to do in the real world. We do this from time to time in the Department of Defense. We do go to a desert somewhere, build a building, and then blow it up, but we don't like to do it very often. It's time-consuming and expensive. And then, of course, the classic example of the wind tunnel test, right? One of the first adopters of technical computing was the aviation industry. Because building these is expensive and time-consuming. Using them is even more expensive, right? So our first HPC and supercomputing users, certainly the ones that we had at the start of my career, came to us because there was nowhere else they could go. If they were going to get their job done, they needed what we had to offer. They were a captive audience. Individual computer users, right, their choice was obvious, right? And the middle stayed at the bottom because they could, right? And that's important. It's not sufficient, and Stephen and Addison and several others have touched on this observation. I've heard John say this before as well. If you're from our community, then you believe in the good that technical computing and HPC can offer a variety of disciplines, right? And you believe it such that it's a fundamental assumption. You think it should be obvious to everyone. But if you're dealing with somebody who already has a process, even if it's painful, right? They probably have calluses in all the right places. Right? They're not aware that they're getting beaten every time they walk into the office, right? They just know that they're getting their job done. And so telling them that you have something better is not sufficient. You have to be able to show it to them, and you have to be able to take what it is you have to offer to them on their terms and have it fit into their workflow. So look at what it takes to go from the bottom to the top. So this is the hill that you face when you're going to get into technical computing for personal computing, right? So the journey from the bottom. Along the way, you face a lot of challenges. Right? From expensive hardware and software, we're fixing that today. Complex management, cloud is coming in and trying to address some of those problems. Primitive interfaces, there's more work to do there. An incomplete tool chain, so that's hand-to-hand combat with individual user communities, with individual problems trying to do one specific thing. Right? And this is something that when we talk with John and the folks that he represents, they face in a very real sense. And then there's that one, just second from the top there, little expertise and no social support, which we'll talk about in a second. So this slide is something I've already said. The missing middle stays at the bottom because they already have something that works, and it's too hard for the reasons that I just listed to try it out. And you can substitute anything you want for hard. Expensive, too much risk, right? All that stuff. It varies with the environment that you're in. So what we want to do is people that know the transformative power of HPC is increase the number of people that use it. Right? The more people that use our tools, and they're not appropriate for everyone, right? But the more people that use our tools, the better off the world's going to be, which is why I do this. So hardware's gotten cheaper and better. I put a check mark by it, not because we're done, but because we're working on it. There are system management options like off-premises deployment. We're working on it. That seems to be developing just fine. I've got yellow bubbles. Interfaces are primitive. We're doing some work. I don't think that there's enough focus on it in the community yet to trust that it's on autopilot or it's at a tipping point yet. So we need to keep up the pressure there. The tool chain is incomplete, and I don't see a solution for that, not a silver bullet at any rate. It's hand-to-hand combat. I think it always will be. So that's yellow. The one thing that we're not doing much about at all is the expertise and social support. And the problem is, I don't know how, and there's no one who can show me. Right? Well, if you look at the folks that we are interested in targeting, right, as HPC believers, we're interested in consumers and in providers. And the traditional focus in our community, and I'm guilty of this as well, is just focusing on the providers. How do we get kids out of grad school to come into our supercomputing centers to write code or to run the computers themselves, right? But that is really the pointy end of a much larger problem. The much larger problem is on the consumer side. The tools aren't relevant if the people that we're trying to help don't recognize them as at least being applicable enough to ask the question, right? So in Viz, I started out in scientific visualization in the early 90s, right? And still, 30 years later, we're running across people that are looking at their data with TechPlot. They're looking at 5 points out of a 2 terabyte data set, right? And Steve, I know, runs into this as well, right? Which is shocking. And I have personally helped when I was doing real work. Now I just do PowerPoint. But when I was doing real work, I've personally helped people that found that their code was doing things that they then went on to verify and validate as new scientific capability that they didn't know was there, right, when we looked at the full solution doing a visualization. It's that kind of insight that we want to convince people at least has the potential to be there for them if they can look at their problem and know that it's a computationally relevant problem. A bonus would be for them to look at their problem and know that a computer couldn't help them, but that's probably a little bit too ambitious. So in practice, this is not 2 endpoints that are independent. There's a continuum, and people may move during their career from one to the other. A lot of the folks that I work with in my supercomputing centers started life as chemists, right, or experimental physicists. And then they started using these things called computers and writing bits and bytes to serial port interfaces to collect data from their instruments. And then they became HPC people along the way, right? And then there are folks that go the other way as well, really fall in love with the discipline, right? So this is a continuum. All of that I talked about at the last talk. So what have we done since then? I'm a part of the High-End Computing Working Group of NITRD, which is the Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Program. It takes a long time to be able to say that acronym without stumbling over it. The High-End Computing Working Group exists for interagency communication among the federal HPC program. So it's the regulars that you would think of, both sides of DOE and NASA and NIST and the DoD, National Science Foundation and those folks. So this is an issue that they see as something that can benefit from coordination among our federal fellow travelers, as well as something that's appropriate for them to deal with, right? Workforce is something that we all have to deal with, and we believe, as folks inside the federal government, that the federal government has a particular set of issues that make it worthwhile for us to look at it rather than just relying on the work of others. So in the year since I was last here, we managed to get done a position on high-end computing workforce development, right? It did take a year, a little surprising to me, but that's okay. We did get there. So the document articulates foundational principles for what we think should be in any successful program around workforce development for the federal mission, with applicability, I think, elsewhere. It's a starting place for agency programs, right? So NITRD doesn't distribute funding, so we're not bringing new funding to this, but it's a way to coordinate and focus our individual agency and mission programs. Let's talk a little bit about what's in this. So, as all good federal HPC documents do, this one starts out by quickly running down the importance of HPC and high-end computing in national security and competitiveness terms, right? We think both are very relevant. Certainly part of the policy discussion today is around the benefits that technical computing can bring to the economy, and that's an important part of our national security. The document looks at a previously done NNSA-funded survey and the characteristics of the HEC workforce to help us understand what we're dealing with. Although I will say that statistics in this area, if you decide to dig in on your own and play along at home, are hard to come by. So if you've got a good pile of statistics on these workers, let me know. And then it articulates some foundational principles that any program, and we don't, in this document, recommend a specific approach, that's next, but that any program has to address for success. Let me talk a little bit about the study because I think it's interesting. It's a good view into the community. With staffing on the provider side, and that's something else to remember, is this study looked at the provider side of the spectrum, not the consumer side. So, the first bullet is not a surprise to any of you. Staffing is hard in our community. 93% of the center surveys said it was hard, somewhat hard or very hard. The next bullet is interesting. So we are cannibalizing ourselves as we staff our centers, right? Where does staff come from? Some from STEM grads. They take a while to come up to speed. Responses range from 6 months to 2 years, with most of them being in about the 12-month time frame, okay? Other HPC centers and HPC vendors, so those last two were particularly helpful for us as a community, right? So we're eating our own. So we've got to grow the pie if we're going to make this sustainable. And then the survey looked at a lot of things, but I'm highlighting just a few things I thought were particularly interesting. What skills are needed on the provider side, okay? So it opened with a combined understanding, so multidisciplinary, of a scientific discipline, kind of doesn't matter which one, and computational science. So I went through one of the early computational engineering degrees, which takes an engineering or math or physics undergraduate and runs him through a little bit of computer science and then some computational stuff to produce a master's candidate. I had spent, at the point that I graduated, I had spent 8 years looking at numerical methods and algorithms, right? And I understood them theoretically, but I didn't really get it in my gut until we started trying to apply that to aircraft design and writing our own codes, right? And so it's when you see these things, these little bit esoteric algorithms applied to a real problem that you really get a gut understanding, and that's what's needed to be a valuable HPC professional. Because when you're working in the provider community, the chances are pretty good that you're not only going to be a computational fluid dynamics person, right? You're going to work with electromagnetics and acoustics, and you're going to work with bio, and you're going to work with weather and ocean, and they all have different problems and different algorithms. But it seems to be our experience that if you get it in any one of those areas, you can get it for the rest of them. And then beyond the application and user side, of course, we need folks that know about scale. We need folks that know how to architect and design and deploy hardware. And that's networking, storage, and computing, right? All right, so what did the NIDARD group think we needed in a workforce development program? So right off the bat, what we're about doing is increasing the impact of HPC and high-end computing. So within NIDARD, the reason I'm using both is within NIDARD, we don't say HPC, we say high-end computing. So we're from the government, and we're here to help. So that's what we're talking about. So HPC, high-end computing impact, right? And we felt like it was critical to address the entire spectrum, from consumers to providers. And the reason for this is the federal workforce is small and aging and shrinking. So we need to do what we can to make sure that we capture those folks who are interested in making a transition, as well as going out and increasing output from the STEM pipeline. So career transition is a big part of what we're interested in, right? And in fact, that's the next bullet. Many of us came to HPC after being in a discipline. It's important to recognize that and stop trying to attack the problem just at the university and college level, and recognize that we have a segment of our workforce that if we could provide a career path, right, and we could provide them a handle on how to make a move into this area, they might be willing to make it. Right? And the other thing that we need to do is steal whenever possible. Look at models that seem to work and figure out why they work and whether they apply to us. So executive MBAs, certification programs, community college. I think Stephen mentioned DeVry earlier, right? Look at those models, find out what works, and understand whether or not we can co-opt the best of what they've done to developing the HPC workforce. Right. The other thing that the NIDARD high-end computing group believes very deeply is that if we want to teach it or have someone else teach it for us, we have to define it. Right? So it's incumbent upon us as owners of the federal mission in computing, right, to enumerate the skill vectors that span the space. So you can tell them a double E. Right? Figure out what are the building blocks in what career paths. So that's two problems. Right? So that we can then go on and teach these skills and have people come in that are more ready than they are today to work in our centers and to work as consumers of our resources. Right? Then once we know what it is we want to teach, right, we start to work with traditional and non-traditional, the partners I talked about earlier, on curriculum. Right. That's not enough. Curriculum's not enough. Certificates are not enough. If we do that, we'll end up with theoretical people that aren't really much good to us in practice, which is why in the traditional engineerings, for example, in physics, you have internships and co-ops and funded research, right? That's all to bring real-world problems and expertise into universities to increase the quality of their output. And we need to continue to do that. That's something that our agencies are doing fairly well today. We need to continue that and coordinate it a little better. So funding research in the academic community on real-world-ish problems. We have sensitivities. So sometimes we have to get problems that are right next door to real-world problems, but those issues can be addressed. Continue to look at internships, fellowships, and awards, not as something that is generically a good thing to do, although it is, but look at it as part of our recruitment activity. Right? This is how you get a qualified pipeline. You start them working on your problems before you hire them. Right? The last thing we think is very important to do is establish and illuminate career paths. Right? List them out. What does it take? What does it mean to be an architect? You're an HPC architect. What did you do before? Where did you go to school? What's your job like now? How do I know that I want to do that? If I do want to do it, how do I know how to learn how to do it? Right? Not a lot of this work has been done in HPC. It has been done in other areas. When I was in high school, I got a little book from somebody, possibly the National Science Foundation, and it had career profiles in it. So if you wanted to be a wet lab biologist, it profiled this. I remember that one in particular. Lovely young woman, just recently graduated. What was she doing now? What did she take when she was in school? What were her grades like? What were her challenges, right? We don't do any of that stuff for HPC. HPC is not organized because it's always been tacked on to something else. Becoming organized will have benefits in growing the workforce and in growing the consumer community. Okay. All of that's in the position paper. And I'll give you a link to that as my last slide. Should have had it as this slide, but that's okay. So next steps for this group. What are we going to do next on this? So we're going to look at, with partners, understanding and defining career paths and skill sets for HPC. There are already some efforts going on in this area. For example, the NSF Exceed program has done some work. We bring a unique perspective that focuses on the federal mission and some of the larger agencies, and so we think we have something to add. But again, we want to continue to steal wherever possible. We also need to map the union of our current efforts among all the agencies, look at where gaps are, and understand how we can reshape our programs as a team to address those gaps. Work with educators and through our partners in National Science Foundation and other organizations to describe and develop curricula aimed at both providers and consumers. Right? And this isn't something, by the way, that we're doing in the next 18 months. This is a long-term effort, one that will potentially never be done. We need to work as a group of folks that can occasionally fund something interesting to pilot new and more flexible methods of education, right, and look at where we can co-opt successful models from other areas that have worked. And we need to continue our funding work on the research side. And the last thing I have there, share, share, share. Do stuff like this to tell people what we're doing. We can learn what's already been done and not copy anything, recreate anything. Okay, so last slide. I mentioned that we just finished the position paper this month, as a matter of fact. It's now up on the web. The shortened URL is at the bottom. If you think that one's bad, you should have seen the full URL. It's brutal. These slides will be available, so you don't necessarily have to write it down now. But take a look. If you've seen, if something is totally off base, let me know. If something, if you think we've got some good potential but need to tweak a little bit, let me know that too. And if you know somebody else that we should be talking to, I'd appreciate knowing that as well. So send comments to me at the email address on the screen. So with that, if you want to delay your lunch, you can ask me a question. Addison, no definitions.